The vast majority of EdTech startups, especially early stage, they want to go direct to the student or direct to the teacher in K-12.
Extremely difficult.
Very difficult. It's going to ultimately be an ecosystem of tools that have to sit within a secure infrastructure. It's not point solutions. That's been the problem with EdTech for a long time. They're all point solutions. The average number of tools of US teachers is something like 200. It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. It's not sustainable. Yeah. It's not good for EdTech either.
No, of course. Yeah.
Because of COVID, we do see this massive learning systems infrastructure within which these solutions can sit with guarantees of security, privacy, and so on like that, because each little one can't do it.
Welcome back to Wise on Air, the show where we talk to the world's leading minds on the future of education. My name is Bassem Hijazi, producer of the show. Did you know that while many industries around the world have developed and utilized sophisticated market intelligence systems to track impact, the education sector, despite its immense size and importance, has historically lacked comprehensive data and insights. And by comprehensive, we mean data that is actionable. This observation led Maria Spies to co-found HolonIQ in 2018, which has since become one of the world's leading providers of impact intelligence. And in an exciting recent development, HolonIQ has been acquired by Quacquarelli Symonds, marking a significant milestone in the consolidation of global education data and analytics. As co-CEO of HolonIQ, Maria has been working at the intersection of education, business, and technology for nearly 3 decades. Her journey began in the late 1990s, building online courses when distance learning was still rudimentary. Today, she leads a platform that analyzes data across education, climate, and health sectors, providing crucial insights for governments, investors, and institutions worldwide. In this episode, WISE director and host Ilyas Falfoul explores with Maria the evolution of education technology, the 5 scenarios shaping the future of education, and what current market trends tell us about where the sector is heading. From the impact of COVID-19 on EdTech adoption to the changing dynamics of investment in the sector, Maria offers unique insights into how data and intelligence are reshaping our understanding of global education. Let's jump to Ilyas to kick off the show.
Maria, it's such a pleasure having this conversation with you. You just came out of a 2 days big event, Back to School Summit, organized by HolonIQ, which became an annual event. I want to congratulate you because you have been with your team and co-founder have been doing remarkable work in the field of education, and it's adding a lot of value to the community. So first and foremost, thank you very much for this, and thank you for joining Wise on Air podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here, and thank you for your compliments. Bringing people together is something that I really enjoy.
You started HolonIQ in 2018, but you have, of course, another life before. Just guide us through your personal kind of background journey and how you ended up in the world of education.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, I've had a few lives before HolonIQ, I feel. But let me start. I started working in education in 1995. So I've been working always on the nexus of pedagogy or education and business and technology in my roles, just serendipitously, I think. I started by working in universities and building online courses, even late 90s when it was very rudimentary, and growing out of distance education. And then I got very interested in the pedagogy of online learning, and I did my master's in that, and then it just sort of went from there. And so EdTech, the integration of technology, professional development for educators on how to teach differently in online environments. So I've been doing that for 20-something years. And then in private and public organisations to do with education. In the last role I had in a corporate, the board of that organisation was they were bricks and mortar, like many education institutions, and they wanted to innovate. And they asked myself and my colleague to build the innovation arm for the company and gave us a bundle of money to invest in EdTech that could ultimately be embedded in their organisation, in their institution. And so that started a really deep conversation about what's the landscape of EdTech, what's out there.
And there's nothing out there.
Well,
or very limited.
Well, there was limited information. Education as a sector has got a vast amount of data, and 90% of it is very inaccessible. And that's a shame, because other industries, even the beauty industry, has got better market intelligence. And so we started to think about how to structure and understand this market, because we were going to invest, and we built taxonomies to try to help us understand it. And that was the very beginning of us thinking about there's a big, big need here in terms of organising data, market data, for the education sector.
That's so true, because when we started WISE in 2009, we had an objective to create this global platform.
Right.
And when we started certain programs, such as the awards or the prize, we start receiving application from exceptional group of people, sometimes in small communities, but they're still doing something exceptional.
Yes.
And no one was capturing those data, those information, the work they've been doing. And the need was there. So as an entrepreneur, you saw an opportunity, basically. So you're a founder.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, I skipped a chapter of my life.
Yeah.
I did start a business when I was 20-something. So I had some, I don't know, entrepreneurial maybe spirit back then even. It wasn't education. But fast to us, it was just a very big problem that needed to be solved. And like your observation, education is very fragmented. It's localised. It's embedded in its context, right? Context is king when it comes to education. And but those things are just unknown. Unknown to potential funders, unknown to potential customers, unknown to competitors or potential partners. And so we wanted to create something that connected all these dots. And that's how HolonIQ was initially born, I guess.
Yeah, and we I think we need more and more of such work, because if we are talking seriously about reform and change the way we are educating our society to have, of course, better global citizen, but also to make sure that it's linked to the market, then data is just key. And I do remember talking with a minister in France. Education is such a very difficult. It's that dinosaur to move.
It's hard.
You know, there's so many sensitivity. There's so many cultural aspects. So
I think I don't know of an example of any material innovation that occurs in a completely fragmented market. I can't think of one. So you really need to join things up, join people up, join conversations, join data. And the thing is about education, it's in it for itself for the long term, as it should be. You can't turn on a dime and change things, because you could really wreck things if you do that. So the resistance or the sort of wariness of shiny objects is well-founded, I think. At the same time, you do need to move forward. And I think that's one of the big challenges.
The issue with changes is not only about just taking shiny new tools. It's just the reality that needs a level of adaptation.
Yes.
Things are changing.
That's the point.
Everything changed.
Yes.
Right? Education sector around the world are very resistant to change.
Right. And it's I describe it as a very old car driving down a road and everyone's zooming past. Like, you have to keep up. Not necessarily for its own sake, but the world is moving and so on. And, you know, it's keeping up.
So now 2018, we created, and all these ventures, everything came out of Australia. Just to put it as
the founders started in Australia. I mean, you know, Australians. But we started with a global remit and very quickly built our headquarters in New York.
In New York.
In New York. Because one of the key points is that it's like a connectedness is very important, not starting in... A lot of, if you're thinking of it as a startup, we don't really think of it as a startup, but, you know, start in your own market and then grow from there and then but that's not but that's not the way, that's not our business. So we needed to start global from the very beginning.
Yeah. So 2018, we start HolonIQ. It is based on some, collaboration with you. It has been a great add to the ecosystem. It's an impact intelligence platform. Can you explain to the audience, where is HolonIQ and what is intelligence? What is this term that we use, the impact intelligence in the case of in alignment with education?
Yeah. So we care about sectors, impact sectors, and we focus on three: education, climate, and health. And those three sectors are incredibly important to the future of humanity. We have to get them right. I mean, as best as we can. They're the foundation for the world to sort of remain sustainable, essentially. And so we focus on education was our first vertical, if you want to call it that, and climate and health are natural additions. And so intelligence, so impact for us is climate, education and health. And then intelligence, it's market intelligence. There's like I said, there's a lot of data in these sectors, or certainly education and health. There's a lot of data, but not data that captures the fragmented, let's say the innovation side of those markets. They capture the lagging indicators of historical incumbent sectors.
Okay.
So for education, how many students graduated from whatever 3 years ago? Because that's the quickest they can get the data. All lagging.
And those are national collection that is probably linked to the UN?
Well, data like that. Countries, states, they all deliver this data, but it's always lagging, and it's of certain types. And or every couple of years there's tests, and then the thing, again is like, so education and health particularly have got a lot of that data. Climate is a whole new game. It in itself is a contested term. It's very fragmented. So but all of these sectors, if you unpick climate for a minute, when we're talking about intelligence, if we unpick climate, really we're talking about energy, environment, sort of sustainability, those sort of areas. And even them, energy is a whole sector in itself. It's massive globally, and the energy transition and so on. And so, but we broadly bundle it under climate. And so all of those sort of areas have, I would call, lagging data indicators only of certain types, and none of them really capture the new innovations and the new models that are going to change the game. Because that is all of this fragmented marketplace. And so the intelligence we gather and pull together is we do scoop up and pull in all those lagging indicators, I would call lagging indicators, national accounts, national information, and we add it to the innovative, new, changing models, and then we add another aspect to it, which is private capital. Not just private capital, but many parts of it is private capital. Where is the money going? Because then you can triangulate. I mean, we have 500 data sources, not just those three, but 500 data sources that help us to build a 360 picture of a sector or a subsector, even sliced by geography. So if you wanted to understand what are the innovations occurring in, Southeast Asia in climate, is it more in energy or is it more in environment? Then governments or private sector or investors can look at where the gaps are. They know their strategy.
And you're targeting these audiences. So you want to have the policymakers looking, but also the investors, right?
Right. So our customers, people who value this information, include definitely governments, because they want to see even city level or state level or country level, I guess, is what are the innovations in the education sector that are happening right in my neighbourhood that I don't even know about?
Wow.
Because it's hard to find. It's fragmented. And, governments have initiatives, they have policy, they have funding. They want to say, for example, support better early childhood education in their geography. Well, what are the innovations that are occurring in their neighbourhood, in their locality, that then they can channel
more
either funding or whatever it may be. So they can identify solutions that are already available for the needs that they have. That's one use case, essentially. So governments definitely of all different levels. Mapping their ecosystem. So, for example, across Latin America, we've mapped the whole education, climate and health innovation ecosystem. And a lot of different stakeholders are interested in that data. And how does Chile, versus Brazil versus Mexico versus whatever, how are they going, and where are their specialties, where are their strengths? That's just for governments is one thing, but investors, of course, because they want to see what's they're thinking about their thesis in a particular area. They want to see all the solutions, and they want to assess all those solutions for potential investment. They want to get the best one and all that sort of thing, right? And the other is organisations themselves. Even early stage, I guess, they want to understand what the landscape is.
How to scale, what's my strategy.
Their competitors, who are their competitors? Who are their potential partners? Universities are very interested in our data because they've got they teach entrepreneurship, they research in the areas that we operate in, and so, they want to see what the landscape is and apply their own sort of filter to that. So we service large companies, governments and investors mainly, and development banks, foundations, and so on like that. They're our main sort of customer base, and universities, for the research and development. I mean, for example, there's a university in Korea who's one of our customers. It's their climate centre. It's their climate research centre.
Interesting.
Because they're researching and they want to have access to all the solutions and so on to inform their research.
I do want to, later on in the conversation, better understand the link between the three pillars of impact. I just want to come back to specifically the next question about education technology. And I would love to hear your perspective on how the field have evolved. Because from my perspective, when I started in 29, EdTech was not very big. And even when we started the accelerator I think in 2013, 2014, a lot of resistance, even from the direct ecosystem, and they were not looking at that the technology. We don't want it too much in the classroom. And then COVID happened, and it has been a huge acceleration. So when you started this in 2018, and today, it seems like a way longer time than just 5 years. What's some of your perspective, observation on how this field is evolving, and maybe share with us some of the optimism you potentially see, or pessimism.
Sure. I think you're right in that 2018 does seem like decades ago, especially with COVID in the middle and the impact of that. COVID, the impact of COVID globally wasn't just a bump in a linear road in EdTech. It really caused and resulted in some cases sort of changed direction, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, in this case, I think it
accelerated.
Was a great thing for.
There's education's big. There's different sectors. There's different geographies, and so good somewhere, bad somewhere else. But generally, what happened. The implementation of technology in learning processes is, let's say, EdTech, but the implementation of technology to improve efficiencies and so on in institutions around the world, which is very needed, is also EdTech. And so I've made that distinction because it is important. And so COVID caused the mass adoption of technologies that were really only used at the periphery, either by the sliver of institutions or organisations that delivered online compared with, the regular delivery, or what I call the innovator's corner.
Yeah.
You know, the science teacher who was really good at tech and, you know, could make things happen because nothing was easy, nothing was integrated. You had to be able to know it yourself. That's hard. And so what happened was mass adoption of these sorts of tools, and sort of unfortunately because of the way it happened, people applied their existing pedagogies to this new environment, and it just doesn't work. You have to redesign.
Without curation,
without real learning, you know, digital pedagogies and so on. But there was no choice. And so, right? And to some extent that might have turned some people off. It's like, oh, I've tried technology, that doesn't work. It's like, okay, it's not about technology. Yeah. It's not the tool. You know, it's the way you use the tool. It's the design, particularly the learning design. And so I think what we saw was mass adoption and acceleration. It didn't go back to what it was, but it wasn't like wholeheartedly adopted. It sort of, you know, lifted and it went down a little, but not way down to what it was. What we've seen subsequent to that is particularly governments all around the world have realised that type of event is likely to happen again. Yeah. And we need to do something about it. Yeah. And so what we've seen is this massive lift in spending and focus on infrastructure. You cannot have good technology experience in learning unless you've got underlying infrastructure. And the technology infrastructure in education in even the most developed countries is fairly poor. Yeah. And so that's one of these trends that we've been watching, and it's playing out in the EdTech funding and what's growing and so on. Those support systems underneath are becoming much more integrated into school systems, universities, corporates even. And so what we call management systems, the underlying learning environments and so on, that is becoming much more used. Now, you don't really see the impact of that yet for EdTech that's working with students. It's coming though, because all that infrastructure is going to be in place and interoperable systems. Of course, AI has caused a laser focus on data and integration of data and use of data and so on for the purposes of learner, you know, analytics. But it will come. You know, it's not quite there yet, but that's one of the big trends.
And you are positive that in terms of getting the right infrastructure in place will have a much better learning outcome, because we're still not, because a lot of when we select at the WISE Accelerator, we want to make sure that there's a strong learning outcome. I don't really care if it's super amazing tool or like how do we measure, and it's very hard to measure. Do you believe that if we get better with the infrastructure, it would have a positive impact on the learning outcome? Are we getting that right, or?
Well, I think the thing is that infrastructure at the sort of lower layer, the EdTech that is building infrastructure, it's an enabler to those tools which interact directly with the student. You're not going to get any sort of global scaled uptake in EdTech by trying to sell to teachers. It's just never going to happen, especially now. And so you need that infrastructure to manage the data, to manage security, to manage So that in itself is an enabler of all the tools that everybody wants to. And so what happens is EdTech, you know, the vast majority of EdTech startups, especially early stage, they want to go direct to the student or direct to the teacher in K-12.
Extremely difficult.
Very difficult. And so it's going to ultimately be an ecosystem of tools that have to sit within a secure infrastructure. It's not point solutions. Point solutions are that's been the problem with EdTech for a long time. They're all point solutions. Like we've got something great for, you know, K-4 assessment. You know, the average number of tools of US teachers is something like 200. It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. It's not sustainable. Yeah. It's not good for EdTech either.
No, of course.
And so we do see, because of COVID, we do see this massive sort of learning systems infrastructure within which these solutions can sit with guarantees of security and privacy and so on like that, because each little one can't do it. And so that's one of the key things that's happening, but it's invisible.
Yeah.
It's invisible. What's visible more is immediate reaction. So for example, in the years of COVID and now, even now, it hasn't really sort of gone down, is the focus on the student experience, holistic approaches to student wellness, rather than just academic, you know, mental health, social, emotional, you know, those sorts of, there's a lot of focus on that and has been since COVID. And so that's one of the other areas that I would say is not a new kid on the block, but in terms of uptake and usage, it is, which is great in a way.
And that you see this mainly in the developed countries, at least the data you have. Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, in developing nations, the focus on foundational literacies is incredibly important.
And
access, of course. Yeah. But in terms of the tools, you know, mathematics and language and so on, and also a lot in the STEAM area.
Yeah.
And so focusing on, you know, sort of, I guess in the past, foundational literacies included basically language and maths, right? But now technology is sort of a foundational literacy. We have to expand that. And so we see a lot of that, and different models though, like you say, like low tech models, online, offline, of course, because that's what that context needs. And so in more developing nations, we see quite a lot of that, and a big focus in K-12 and early childhood, more K-12, because that's where the population is, and that's where the need is. Whereas in you know, other countries, more developed countries, workforce upskilling is all there is, not all there is, but mostly because this big problem with ageing population and, you know, technology and upskilling and so on. So really where you are in the world makes a big difference as to what EdTech even is, right?
Take us to just going back to a kind of a macro level. Part of your presentation yesterday at the summit, at the opening session, you have those mega trends
key shifts,
and scenarios actually. We call them scenarios or mega trends or the five
scenarios.
The region. Can you walk us through what are the 5 scenarios you see for education and how this will affect you know, EdTech founders or investment in EdTech? Or
one of the things we did early on is to think about the way. Well, firstly, we manage a lot of data, we analyse a lot of data, and we identify patterns. And so we used machine learning way back then, which wasn't even called that, to identify. We did an analysis of, I don't know how many thousands of papers, journal articles, books, you know, all sorts of publications that focused on the future of education. And so we did an analysis of all those using machine learning and identified patterns in what were these thousands of experts saying around the future of education. And what was clear in the data was there were 5 broad thematics. And so we did a whole range of work in addition to that to identify what those thematics were and develop those into these scenarios. So 5 scenarios for the future of education included scenario one, which is education as usual, and those, you know, the sort of existing structures stay in place, trust in institutions as the best way for learning and so on, and governments remaining the main
business
funders.
As usual?
Businesses.
No changes.
No real changes. And so any existing inequities, status quo, any existing inequities or whatever would be exacerbated in this scenario, education as usual. The second one was regional rising. And regional rising actually is my favourite scenario, one of my favourites. And that is where it's in a world where the world isn't polarised per such, but it's along regional lines.
100%.
Alliances.
Even at a geopolitical level, we are entering a phase where we're gonna go back to the blocks, basically.
Right. Yeah. And so, so where co-located regions connect up, they talk to each other and say, well, you're doing that, we're doing the same thing, why don't we team up, partly, not only, but partly due also to the need for movement of talent and movement of labour across borders. Our education systems are along national lines, basically. And if your neighbour has got a big population and you don't, or you need certain types of skills, then you need to be able to align your education systems. We see it already. I mean, we see it in the world already, but making that easier. And so economic and education, sort of alignment along regional lines. That's regional rising. The third one is global giants. Global giants is in a world where it's a sort of, it's a globalised economy, pretty much, not fragmented, but really globalised, and a few really very large global education brands rise up and deliver education to...
We have few today.
Very few.
We have very few, okay.
We have very few.
Can we mention one or two examples of what would be considered into this category?
Well, I could be controversial and say the biggest educator, global brand. So this is global brands, and so like in the consumer world, you've got big technology brands, for example, and they sell all over the world.
Amazon is a global brand.
The Amazons of the world, or whatever, right? So that happens in education, and we might have 5 or 6 of them. We really don't have that right now, except, as I said, I could be controversial and say something like, well, YouTube is the biggest educator.
Is the biggest, yes.
Or Google.
Yes.
Google Classroom.
Yeah.
Or Microsoft, or they're technology brands.
It's funny because they are not education focused; they are society focused, and they have a big component of their businesses in education.
Yeah, I mean, so Google and Amazon. I mean, Amazon
I was going to talk about Coursera a little bit.
Coursera, maybe
it goes into this category.
Right, Udemy, at the upskilling, millions and millions of learners, right? And so, global giants is that scenario, and we see elements of all of these scenarios already, right? Whether the world's ready and accepting of global giants in education, I don't think so. Because education it's not just learning about stuff. This is educating culture. It's replicating culture, and cultures are different, as perhaps they should be.
Actually, now that we're talking about it, I think we're not accepting again, disclaimer, this is just an opinion. My opinion. Anything that is very focused on education only and super global will not be accepted. And something like YouTube is accepted, actually. And this is my really own kind of opinion. I feel this is what I observe based on this conversation. I feel like YouTube, you know what? Everyone use it. Everyone learn. Even kids today, they learn more on YouTube than going to classroom.
But it's not the dominant education system. So will the extent to which the dominant education system in a country will ingest and use YouTube as a core resource, well, it's mediated by people who in that geography, i.e. teachers or whoever's making policy, right? And so global giants sees a world where that mediation is not there. So that's that scenario. The fourth one is peer-to-peer, which is people are like, we've had it with institutions, we'll go peer-to-peer. You're an expert in that, you teach me, and then I'll be an expert. That sort of... there's a bit of a utopian... A few years ago, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was a sort of a big push in blockchain and, all that. And everyone can just be peer-to-peer and so on. And there are a few models in education, it's very difficult. to formalise that. You see some platforms and things like that, but what happened is that big buzz in blockchain got completely sort of overwhelmed by all the NFT and the sort of Bitcoin, and everyone went, oh, okay, no, and went away from it. So it's still there. It's going to be, that technology, that underlying technology is going to be very important when we come to things like verification of qualifications and the ability to, verify, learn over here and verify over there geographically. That's going to be very important. But it's like an underlying technology rather than a model. But peer-to-peer is very popular. When we get global voting, peer-to-peer is always up there. People love the idea of peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
Get rid of those institutions in the middle. But actually, they love the idea of it, but hard to pull off.
In theory, it's great, but in practice, we don't have yet the technology up to the level.
And whether we actually ever ultimately have the trust, I'm not sure. The fifth scenario is Robo revolution. Robo revolution.
This is new in your because the previous year the Robo revolution was not part of these scenarios. 5
scenarios. There's Robo revolution's been there from the beginning. Okay. Yeah. So in 2018 we identified one scenario where artificial intelligence just takes off. I mean, we never envisaged generative AI, but there you go. It did.
It goes into the bucket of robot.
Yes, it is. It's Robo revolution is an AI scenario.
Yeah.
And the idea that everyone in the world, let's say a lot of people in the world, learning, the decision for learning is turned upside down. And it's not a choice-led thing, but it's a data-driven decision-making. And so every person has a virtual tutor that knows them, that knows their learning, that knows what they're doing, that can say, oh, if you're in this job and you've got these skills, but you need to, that's going in that direction.
This is what we call the personalized learning experiences.
Right, but your own personal learning
journey.
Bot, essentially, like a tutor. Right, and that curates for you, forever assistant, curates for you, even suggests when there might need to be a human intervention. You need a human to help you with this thing because it's too complex or whatever. And in the classroom, in K-12, for example, robot assistants in the classroom. We're already seeing all of these things, by the way. It's just whether it's ubiquitous or not. And so that's the Robo revolution takes AI to the whole new level. We've been around the world and got audiences, as in education audiences, to vote on likelihood and preference of these 5 scenarios. And it was our first piece of work, actually. And very interesting differences. So, for example, when we were in China, Robo Revolution was like, they were really keen on it, whereas in France, it was peer-to-peer all the way. It's culturally absolutely. Yeah. So the reality, of course, is that there's not one scenario going to be present, but elements of all of these things. But it does help to think about what's the push and pull, what are the factors that are going to be pushing and pulling in order to think differently about the future. Otherwise, most people think in a linear way. It's sort of going to be the same but bigger or something, when they're planning. And so those scenarios have been very helpful for many people.
For founders and for investors. I correct my assumption on what I'm about to say. I have a feeling that the healthcare sector have adapted technology much more than the education sector. Is this right or wrong? First question, and then I will follow up.
All right. So the answer to that depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to anyone who's in the healthcare system, they would say not really. They feel like it's still in the dark ages. But the reality is that technology has been embedded much more into the practice of medicine and health for a very long time. There's it's interesting because I link everything back to education. It's just in my DNA. And the world of research in medicine, in health, has been, pulling and, delivering technology solutions for many years. So biotech and, anything to do with, the use of technology in any sort of practice of medicine has been like amazing. The research and the research funding is huge for medical research. Education research, education technology, nowhere near it. And I see the parallels between if you spend 30, 40, 50 years doing doing research, these are universities and research centres and so on, in the applications of technology in all its forms in medicine, you're going to have better practice. They've just had a lot more long time at it. But in the practice of in some areas of medicine, it's still like education. There's a local GP and you go to the GP and you whatever. There's a lot more diagnosis, but think about wellness, the ability, it's more hardware, software driven, than in education, except for STEAM perhaps, but think of all the wellness devices that everyone's got now.
It's incredible.
It is incredible.
I have
2. You've got 2 already on, exactly, and we've got a 3rd one because we've got a microphone. So, I think there's been lots of advancements, but still there's sort of, I guess, space.
What explained then that in the healthcare sector, it's probably a bit more critical for human, and it touched upon one of the most important things, which is health.
Yes.
And yet we have accepted to take risk to adapt. Basically, there's a level of experimentation and risk with technology.
In health.
In health, which the fact that there's more tech, the question is, why us as human, we have accepted to take more risk to integrate technology in the health sector and not in education, which is not affecting immediately it could be a threat to mental health maybe, but not to anything.
Well, I like I said, I guess I put it down to what's the process to bring a new technology into health? There's what underpins that? There is a huge sector of medical research. There is a very well understood, well-known process for medical trials and The other thing with medicine that is not existing in education, so firstly they've got that infrastructure for many years. So you've got the ability to deliver new solutions. The other thing that's visible in health that's not in education is that there is a very, very large commercial opportunity to commercialise health innovations, which does not exist in education. That's it.
So R&D and commercialization are the 2 aspects that are letting the field
the ability to commercialise. I mean, drug companies and medical device companies and so on. This is a commercial model.
Of course.
But what's the equivalent in education? There isn't one.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah. How do we connect now what we call the impact intelligence field? How the health tech pillar, the climate tech pillar, is connected to the EdTech pillar, according to the HolonIQ platform?
Yeah. So when we think about, because we ingest so much data, you need to build data structures, essentially, to manage it. Otherwise, it's just a big mess. And part of our the way we do that is work with people all around the world and in the sectors to help us build taxonomies to structure. And then all our data is organised according to those taxonomies. So you can really dive down in particular areas and so on. And it's interesting that when particularly health and education, the crossover, there are many organisations and initiatives and so on where there's big arguments about whether they're health or whether they're education. There is a crossover there. I mean, for us, these impact sectors are the ones that underpin sustainable society and sustainable world, not just physical, not just climate sustainability, but human sustainability. So that's the common thread, I guess. But for, say, for example, we're in New York right now, right? And yesterday at our summit, we heard from a couple of fantastic speakers on green skills, and particularly New York City Economic Development Department. New York City has got a very, very big sort of green economy, and many cities around the world, a big green economy sort of focus. And one of the big challenges is what are green skills? Who's educating for green skills? How can you? What does the education system need to do or not do or can start doing for these skills and jobs of the future? So the skills component, and same in health, right? Particularly ageing workforce, etc. So I was on a panel yesterday with talking about the role of community colleges. And community colleges are embedded into their context, right? They service the local community. And they were talking about how funding of, in some countries, this country particularly, but funding of education systems is biased towards certain types of, post-secondary education, not others. And so, for example, if you want to be a nurse, a registered nurse, and go straight into that, you can get funding for it. But there are pathways to be a registered nurse, like from healthcare worker and so on and so on. But you can't get funding for that. And so, in terms of to be trained for it, and so the skills and education policies make big impacts on workforce in areas like climate and health. And so they're the sort of intersections that we're looking at.
So the more they talk together, the better.
Absolutely.
For
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Going back to EdTech and specifically the community of investor.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've seen a massive, with COVID, a lot more enthusiasm, and things have dropped significantly. Are we gonna see a stability, or are we gonna see a more deep down, or things are gonna pick up. Somehow? Like, what are some of the projection?
Well, the current levels of venture capital, that's only one type of capital. So EdTech, if you're an EdTech founder listening, there are multiple types of capital and you should look at multiple. But venture capital is one type of capital and it's for a certain purpose, right? And so venture capital is often quoted, and venture capital has dropped something like 90% between 2022 and now. And so that's a lot of drop. But when you go back through the years, even in 2018, I think it was $4 billion. And so then it went to $24 billion. And so the last couple, the years of COVID were like crazily huge. What happened there was, what's happened is the big rounds, the $250 million venture capital rounds, $100 million venture capital rounds are gone. And that inflates the number. And so to me, those times it's sort of dangerous times. You can see a bubble just about to burst. You can see it happen because one needs to think about how would an investor whose remit is to get a return in a short period of time, investing that amount of money in a model that is not designed for short-term, it's not a consumer product. I mean, there are B2C, of course, but so it's unrealistic. It was unrealistic. To some extent, the term I heard yesterday from somebody else was, okay, well, the tourists have left. Right? The tourist investors. They thought it was great. They were watching their kids in COVID saying, wow, is that the best education could do? I'm going to invest in that and make something happen. So the tourist investors have gone.
Okay.
And they've moved.
Specialists are back.
Yeah, they've moved into areas, what other areas.
They're more opportunistic, basically,
Right. And so we're back to a point where substance matters, and I think that's a good thing in education. If you're going to raise money now in EdTech, you really need to have a solid grounding in a product that is going to service students and actually deliver outcomes. So there is a much more of a focus on outcomes than ever before, and we're seeing that over the last couple of years only. And I think that's very, very positive. And it brings down valuations and so on. But if you're in EdTech and your objective is to raise a lot of money, get big quick, and then get out, then you shouldn't be in EdTech.
Yeah, 100%.
You're in the wrong industry. Go somewhere else. And I don't think most EdTechs are in it for that. But you're going to be disappointed if that's your objective.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing even it's hard. It is hard, but even governments we're seeing starting to think more carefully about criteria for if you want to be on their list for using EdTech in their school system, then here are some criteria. This is what we're looking for. We're starting to see evidence of outcomes and measurement of outcomes being part of that, although that is very contested because it depends on how it's used in some cases. But that's not to say we shouldn't, build that in to criteria.
And what is the role of philanthropies here? And is it, in some places, I feel in the past year, some money was not invested in the right places. Do we see now a new definition of how the money of philanthropy could serve this community? Because we're looking at, as you just mentioned, an EdTech is not a tech company. You're looking at a 7-10 years, window. You're not looking at 4, 5, 6, 7 years, right? So we need different type of money that can support these innovations. Do you see changes in the philanthropy world? I
think, firstly, whilst venture capital in EdTech, the chart goes up and then it sort of dives. Philanthropy money, foundation money in EdTech, in education, has been incredibly steady, incredibly steady. And so that base of funding is a good thing, and it's sort of solid and steady, right? And I think that I'm a big believer in capacity building. Yeah. And so I love to see philanthropy money go to building capacity so that things can grow on their own. It needs seeding, right? And that's where philanthropy has a great role to play in seeding and pulling together and starting and capacity building, which does take years, but they've got years. Yeah. And that's great. And sometimes governments don't have that funding. It comes and goes with government change and so on. And so I think there's a fantastic role to play, sort of as long as the ultimate goal of that long-term investment is capacity building, because it has to be self-sustaining ultimately, right? And you can't do that without local capacity. You had a fantastic 5 years since 2018 running HolonIQ. It's been a ride. Yeah. It's been busy. What's the next 5 years? Oh, well, that's a question that wasn't on the list. All right. It's the conclusion. Oh, it's the conclusion. Okay. I think for us, there's HolonIQ is global, and so there's lots to do. Part of the next 5 years, I guess, is consolidating a little on what we do and where we do focus. We've got lots of opportunities to support more support at the national level, because that can help make a greater impact. And so there are the sorts of areas we're looking. But still global. And as much as possible, we try to make as much information available to the world as possible, because it's still quite a fragmented sort of situation. And so we're going to continue doing that, but working and doing projects and so on with larger either organisations or collaborations, like our work, for example, in Latin America has unlocked a lot of value for all different parts of the ecosystem. So we love to do that. Yeah. And your next summit is happening in DC. It's about skills. Right, so yes, skills and jobs is an area that's incredibly important to us. It's to some extent, part of the end game for education, not the only, but part of it. And so we're delivering a Global Skills Week in March in DC, where we're focusing on green skills, AI and tech skills, health skills, and also building a higher education day as part of green, because these things need to be connected. Now we're connecting between workforce and education.
Yeah.
And there are other sort of parts of the education landscape that are often disjointed.
Yeah, and these communities need to talk together.
Absolutely.
I've been one of the fan of the HolonIQ events around the world. I have been lucky to do Stockholm, Paris, New York, Cairo, that was fun. And I look forward to many more events to follow you and do the running with Patrick in the morning.
Yes, the HolonIQ Run Club is very popular.
It is.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Maria. This has been an insightful conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.